Welcome to the Winmark C-Suite Spot interview series, where we explore careers and how to reach the C-suite. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Susie, who is a serial CEO. Has been MD at Credit Suisse, CEO of a PLC, and most recently the CEO of a bank, Tandem Bank. Susie, great to be with you here today.
Great, and John, thank you for having me. Good morning.
Thanks, Sue. So if you don't mind, I'll go straight into the questions. So it's a question about your career. So when you were sort of 5 or when you were a kid, what did you want to be?
A show jumper. I wanted to ride horses. I was absolutely mad passionate about horses, and I wanted to be a professional show jumper. I did subsequently go on to actually win a horse in a W.H. Smith competition, but didn't ever become a professional show jumper.
Wow. And when did that, and was that still the same when you were 18, or did you change your mind at university, or?
I guess it certainly evolved. I think probably by the time I was 18, I'd figured out probably I didn't necessarily want to live my life as a professional show jumper. I think that the other thing that happened in parallel is we had a family business. My father and his family had run a chain of optician shops across the Midlands, and wow. I always thought through once I'd moved on from the show jumping that I would step in and run that family business. And actually, by the time I finished university, for various reasons, that business was being sold. But I think that started out the passion or the desire to be involved in business, to run a business. And so that's probably what I was thinking by the time I left university, albeit the family business no longer an opportunity, so I had to figure out my own opportunities thereafter.
Very interesting. And can I ask a question like, because my wife's family has a family business. How do you think as you were growing up with that, how do you think you in a way benefited from the learning from that other kids may not have if they didn't have that exposure, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think that it certainly instilled a desire to work, and I think that I always had that. I remember some of my holidays were in the factory of that business. It was an optician shop, and literally in those days the frames would go along and you'd put things in boxes. But then also my father and my uncle sort of working and going around the shops, so I think it seeing it from within the family certainly instilled a number of the certainly that work ethic, certainly a desire to operate with people, and so I do think it gave me some interesting perspectives.
Okay, thank you. And if you then had to sort of summarize your career since you were sort of 18 in a minute, what would you how would you summarize it?
1 minute. And so I did an economics degree at university. When I left university, I then went and joined the Unilever graduate programme, during which I qualified as an accountant. I then moved on and spent a number of years in retailing. And so there's a theme of some quite different shifts through my career. I spent a number of years in retailing, mainly in corporate finance, M&A, and also business development. I then made a fairly significant shift from retailing into financial services and went to and worked for Credit Suisse, where I was for about 15 years. So a global top tier bank. Very sorry to see what's happened to Credit Suisse more recently. But so a number of years at Credit Suisse, and then I made the transition into more boutique banks. Initially, as you mentioned earlier, John, British Arab Commercial Bank PLC, a medium-sized trade finance bank, and then most recently as CEO of Tandem, a digital challenger retail bank. And so again, some quite sort of different areas of focus through that.
And on that journey, have there been any sort of key moments or decisions you've made that have sort of in a way enabled it, if that makes sense?
I think that as I say, if you do look at my career, and I think that what is quite unusual is that transition, for example, from retailing into financial services. Some of the earlier roles I did whilst I was at Credit Suisse were much more in sort of a support function, through into latterly I was head of business development, Europe, Middle East and Africa, so a very much business focused area of responsibility. And then I think that also I made a pretty significant shift from a top tier global bank into some of the boutique and challenger bank spaces. And so I think it's that ability or willingness to make some of those fairly bold moves. As I look back, some of them weren't fairly brave and fairly bold, but I think that has broadened me as both as a person, but also crucially as a leader.
And did you have a sort of guide or mentor on the journey, or multiple guides or mentors, or anyone help you?
I think the word multiple is probably most apt throughout all of our journeys, and I can't think of many people that I've come across who don't have somebody or multiple people who support them in different ways through their journey. At Credit Suisse, for example, when I joined Credit Suisse, my boss was an amazing individual. He was a former US Marine, very straight talking, and I worked for him for about 8 years, and I delivered. He did expect me to deliver, and I delivered a lot and delivered well for him, but equally he was a really key sponsor, and he supported me and my development. And I do think not just in very big institutions, you do need those sponsors and those supporters who can talk up for you, who can mention your name in the relevant conversations. And I think that flows throughout your career in different ways. And of course, what you need and who needs to support and sponsor you needs to evolve as you go on your career journey.
Thank you. And I was told a long time ago, I think at business school, that one of the things that transformed the banks was actually retailers going into them and bringing retail practice into them. And from what you said, you were kind of one of those people.
I was one of those people. I absolutely was. And perhaps just a very brief sort of synopsis at the Burton Group, the retailer I was working in. So I was called retail planning controller. So I was looking across 1,200 shops and whether or not we should change fascia, change brand, modernize, etc. Should we change a Burton menswear to a Dorothy Perkins, for example? And the analysis and justification I used to have to do to spend £50,000 changing a shop or buying a new one, compared to then going into Credit Suisse, where you could potentially spend millions without necessarily needing some of the depth and the rigor of the analysis. And so it was very definitely, as I went into Credit Suisse, it was trying to, as you rightly say, pull people in who really would as I say, review decisions, review data in an analytical way, but also in a creative way. And so absolutely, I was one of those people. It's interesting, you've heard of others, transition. And I think that the other thing that retailing gave me is that view of the customer, and the customer is so important, and you learn that in retailing, and more recently, for example, at Tandem, a bank which is very much focused on the customer, and you really do need to look at who is the end customer, and make sure you're focusing and delivering services they want.
Really interesting. So would you say that retail was probably quite a good place to, in a way, learn about business as a area?
Yes. Yes, it absolutely was. As I say, from the point of view of the customer, I did my MBA thesis on what does retailing look like in the face of the shift that we all know now, looking back, has been profound, from physical retailing into online retailing. And again, that has become pervasive in so many aspects of our life. So I have no doubt that those foundations in retailing have been really important through my career.
Okay. And have you had any sort of big blockers or challenges on your journey, and if so, what have they been, and have you overcome them?
Yeah, and yeah, yes, of course, and different challenges. I think that perhaps it's worth talking through style and how you create and learn to flex your style while also staying authentic. And I think that it is important that you communicate. It is important that you build relationships and that you build networks. But also, and so as I say, I've seen that sometimes, or needing to develop and grow that style as something that I have had to look at and focus on as I've in my career.
Okay. And okay, and when you sort of moved into your top sort of top team role, your executive committee role kind of thing, why do you think you were chosen as opposed to other people?
Yeah, I think that ultimately any leader has to deliver. You do have to execute, and I think that what I did through I don't know, sort of the kind of middle part of my career before sort of stepping into those C-suite roles is you have to. I think that what I have been able to do is kind of balance the big picture. You have to kind of create a vision. You have to know where you're going, but there is no point having that vision if you can't get there. And so I think that making sure you get the right balance between strategy and planning, but also execution is important. I think clearly, and again, as you become a more senior leader, you need to learn to work through people. You can't do it all yourself. So working through people and building out relationships, I think, is really important. And perhaps another theme that we touched on a bit earlier on is you do have to take risk-based decisions. As a banker, almost every decision you take is a risk-based decision. And so it's making sure you are bold enough to take those decisions, making sure you make them as to the extent possible based upon a considered view, but you do have to be brave. I think I have been that on a number of occasions.
And you ran the banks through COVID, is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I did.
So how did that must have been quite a sort of change. There must have been quite a change. How did how and quite sort of a sort of external crisis sort of coming in and hitting you. How did you sort of lead the banks through that?
Massive amount of preparation and readiness, getting PCs and chairs and desks and all the rest of it out to people. So there was definitely a sort of logistical exercise, but also at that time, the bank I was running, BACB, we were a trade finance bank operating in Africa, in a number of African markets, African and Middle Eastern markets. And so we had to make some really crucial business decisions on were we going to keep lending in that environment. And frankly, and again, I appreciate this wasn't unique to us. The information wasn't perfect. What was the impact of COVID going to be, not just in the UK, but what was it going to be in Nigeria or Kenya or some of the markets in which we were operating? And so we had to make swift, decisive decisions without full information. And we made a number of decisions to pull back on our lending, but equally, as soon as more data or information came through, we constantly calibrated and adjusted those decisions. And so you had to decide, you had to lead from the front, but also constantly evolving that decision process. And of course, the other thing that so many people learned through COVID, if not before, was communication. Multiple different styles of communication: the one-on-one, the full team, the weekly Zoom call, whatever it was. But and again, I think that communication and indeed flexibility are some of the positives that came out from that pretty challenging time.
Okay. And a lot of people say that the when you join the Exco, you think differently. You perceive the organisation in a different way. Did you find that the first time you moved into a sort of top team?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that my journey was from having gone from doing a very broad business development role at Credit Suisse, and then I moved into BACB actually as CFO. So I went from a lot of breadth to then saying, okay, I am an accountant. I need to really build out on some of that technical strength. So I joined the Exco as the CFO, as both a technical expert, but also a strategist and somebody leading business decisions. And so definitely some different ways of thinking. And I think what's really crucial in any C-suite top table is how you work as a team. And certainly as I moving into the CEO's seat, it's how do we make sure we as an Exco will constructively challenge each other in that Exco room. And I expect to be challenged myself. I expect my team to challenge each other. There's an appropriate
Mhm.
way of doing so. But equally, as soon as you walk outside of that Exco door, the Exco team needs to be providing a clear and consistent and unified message for the rest of the organisation. And that's something that I've really stressed throughout my time as a C-suite leader, and in particular as a CEO.
But that's a good point. So when you look to recruit a new member of your Exco, what sort of things do you look for in those individuals?
Yes, and clearly, increasingly at that senior level, you really need to make sure, or you should be able to assume that they've got the technical skills. So you put the technical skills on one side, but of course you're looking for somebody from a cultural fit, and I know cultural fit is very broad, but are they going to be a team player, somebody who will collaborate, somebody who will drive that constructive challenge across the team, but also somebody who will be driven and passionate as we all move towards our strategic goals. But as we know, the best teams are built of people with different perspectives, different ways of doing things. And so there's always a little bit in mind, how do we make sure that it's a complementary team, certainly not a team of sort of where everybody thinks or acts in the same way.
Okay. And if you reflect back on your career, is there anything you've done differently?
um, Probably the most obvious answer for this is, particularly as somebody who's led business strategy for many years, is probably to have been a bit more strategic about my own career. Because if we go back earlier on in the conversation, that I kind of knew sort of what I wanted to do, but I didn't have that, okay, what's my end goal? And therefore, how am I going to get there? Of course, any strategy needs to evolve and to flex,
Mhm.
but yes, if I look back, or if as I advise or my children going into their careers, it would probably be to be a little bit more strategic and a bit more planned about where do you want to go, while recognizing that the path is never a totally straight line.
Okay. And how do you think your leadership style has evolved from when you sort of started out?
Yeah, and I think that the answer to that is, as you start out, and I talked earlier around flexing your style,
Yeah.
as a CEO, one style doesn't fit all. I think what's so important as a CEO is that you can is that you can flex easily between different leadership styles. There are sometimes you've got to instill trust, you've got to be decisive. There are other times when you need to be collaborative and consensual so that you bring everybody along with you. And what I think is really important for a successful CEO is, one, having the ability to flex your style. Secondly, having the judgment on what's the most appropriate style in that situation, and the emotional intelligence to also gauge and flex the style. And so that is, I think, the most important thing. Certainly, I have learned in that CEO seat, one style doesn't fit all. It's that ability to flex it that's so important.
Okay. And you've got, can I ask how old are your children? Can I ask? They're
Ooh, I have four. I have four daughters. So we've got when we got a puppy during lockdown, it had to be a boy because there were more than enough women in our house.
Yeah.
I have a 29-year-old who is a doctor, a 27-year-old who's a
Wow.
lawyer, and then 16-year-old twins. And so yes, it is interesting seeing them, as particularly the older two, as they have started out on their career journeys. That certainly that's where my be a bit more strategic
Yeah.
advice comes in.
Because I've got three daughters but
Right.
who's slightly younger. They are, what are they? They're 13, 11, 9 at the
Right.
moment. But and enjoy it. And we though got a female dog. So I'm completely surrounded. But more thing, what now you've got sort of 20-year-olds in the house kind of thing. What advice would you give to a 20-year-old who wanted to be like you and be a CEO of a PLC or a bank in 30 years' time? What advice would you give them?
I think firstly, having a career, I think, is so important and so fulfilling. Certainly, my advice would be go there and do have a rewarding and fulfilling career. I think you need to be aware that luck or opportunity, it doesn't just fall in your lap. You have to find it, see it, and grasp it. And so you do need to forge your own opportunity, and I think that's really important. Probably secondly, we all work through relationships, and building and nurturing the relationships. That doesn't mean just looking up. That means looking around, looking down, looking across the organization, and of course outside the organization. So look out, build your own opportunities, build out the relationships, and probably lastly, never stop learning. Never stop learning just because you're a CEO or a board member. Never stop learning. Ask for feedback and constantly evolve.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you to everyone who's listening to today for the Sweetie interview. And thank you, Susie, Annika, for your many words of wisdom. I hope everyone's enjoyed the deep dive and found that Susie's great tips and ideas are useful. And we look forward to being with you next time. And that's it from us. And enjoy the rest of your day. And that's a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.